So Matt Walsh decided once again to open his mouth about something he has absolutely no idea what he is talking about. He decided to start off this section with a clip from the governor of Virginia. So I'm just going to let them get into it.
Today, I have vetoed the bill to create a commercial retail market for cannabis.
All right, so before we get into this too far, we need to understand the legal semantics of some of the words that they're using here, and we also need to understand the chemistry and biology of what we're actually talking about. So, just for starters, weed is legal in the United States. Weed has been legal in the United States since 2018. It's called the 2018 Farm Bill. Google it, look it up if you don't believe me. All 50 states, weed is legal, okay? I don't want to hear about how, we need to fight. Like, no. Weed has been legal in America for 6 years, people. Get on board with the program. If you don't know that, you're not paying attention to what's happening. Now, in the 2018 Farm Bill, it doesn't define weed as cannabis because cannabis is what's legally defined as illegal in most states and most parts of America and also federally. However, the law defines the same plant as hemp because the 2018 Farm Bill legalized every single cannabinoid in the plant except for delta 9 THC. Delta 9 THC is the active ingredient in weed or pot or whatever you want to call it that typically people associate with the high. So, the irony of what the government did is they legalized weed without understanding that they legalized weed. Because if you remember chemistry class from high school, then you'll know what a precursor is. And if you don't know, a precursor is the form of a chemical, typically in an unstable form, that breaks down into another chemical. And, well, if you legalize every single cannabinoid in the plant except for delta 9 THC, well, then you just legalized weed because you just made the precursor to delta 9 THC legal, which breaks down into delta 9 THC. And the irony of this situation is if you've ever heard of THCA, that's basically just legal weed, okay? Because THCA stands for delta 9 THC acid. And if you remember acids from chemistry class, acids break down when exposed to heat and or ultraviolet radiation, or any type of radiation for that matter. And any of the websites that you buy THCA from that are what I would consider legitimate sources of the product, they all tell you that the proper way to store it is at 55 degrees Fahrenheit away from sunlight. And the reason they tell you that is because if you do not store THCA at that temperature away from sunlight, it degrades down into delta 9 THC and becomes illegal. But the best part is it's like the cops and the government, they have no idea. So and the best part is even if you were involved in a case where they tested your stuff and you did buy it legally, but it had degraded down into delta 9, you can still fight that in court as in, like, I'm the customer, I was never informed of this, I had no idea I had to do this to this product because most of the people selling THCA do not tell you how to properly store it. And nowhere in the law does it says that the customer is legally held responsible for understanding the chemistry of this plant. So that's why I laugh when people say, like, cannabis isn't legal, weed isn't legal. Yes, it is. Weed's been legal for 6 years. Wake up. Not only that, I also find it laughable, the terminology people use and to describe this kind of stuff, like cannabis is the illegal one, but hemp is the legal one. But if you actually look at it from a biological perspective, it's the same fucking plant, guys. It's the exact same thing. It's just two different names for the same thing. And the only difference is well, before the THCA, because in all weed plants, every single weed plant that is illegal, the delta 9 THC, that is the illegal cannabinoid in the plant, at one point was all THCA, and it degraded down into delta 9 THC. That's how the plant creates these cannabinoids. It first starts with CBD, and through multiple and many processes of essentially changing the chemical structure of the CBD, you end up with all the different cannabinoids of the plant. And I've looked up the law in the 2018 Farm Bill. The 2018 Farm Bill defines marijuana or cannabis as anything with a delta 9 THC concentration above 0.5%, and anything with a delta 9 THC concentration below that is legally considered hemp. Even though it's the same plant, and you could literally have a delta 9 THC plant before it's basically ready for harvest, when all of the THC on it is still THC acid and hasn't had time to break down into delta 9 THC, that can be considered a hemp plant up until the point where all of the THCA breaks down into delta 9 THC, at which point it becomes cannabis. Same plant, almost exactly the same chemicals, different names, different legal status. Complete fucking joke, in my opinion, if you ask me. Not only that, in case you were wondering, yes, you can use THCA the exact same way you can use regular old delta 9 THC, because it has such a sensitive temperature range. When you combust it and inhale it, you basically convert all that THCA into delta 9 THC. So any legal weed that you have is perfectly legal until you expose it to sunlight or heat for too long, or you smoke it. As soon as you smoke it, it breaks down into illegal weed, and at that point, that's how you get high, which is why I laugh at these word games that people play, because when you understand the biology and the chemistry of what we're actually talking about here, then you start to see the ridiculousness of all of this. I'm sure there was more technical explanation than anybody cared to know, but we need to get that basis level of understanding before we can move on to more complex topics in this video.
Cannabis is bad for Virginia. And in all the other states that have had an extensive retail market, what you see is, first, it's terrible for children and adolescents' health and safety.
I would like to see the studies that you are basing this claim off of, sir, because I don't believe you. Not only that, what you're going to hear me say a lot throughout this video is let's flip the script. Let's flip the script, meaning let's change the word marijuana, cannabis, weed, whatever you want to call it. Let's change it to alcohol. The exact same thing could be said with alcohol. But nobody is going up on TV and saying the exact same things and then saying this is why we should ban alcohol or this is why we should ban tobacco. Nobody's saying that. They only want to say that when it comes to weed. Curious, isn't it?
Massive increases in child poisonings.
I'm just going to go ahead and call bullshit on that, because I really don't think he has any studies to back that one up. Because, I mean, if you've ever smoked weed, you know what it does to you. Like, not only that, the amount of delta 9 THC you would have to consume to actually overdose on it, to thus be poisoned by it, is such a high concentration that in the medical community, it's actually considered almost impossible to actually consume enough cannabis for cannabis to be the cause of your death. Because I think you need to eat something like 1 or 2 pounds of pure delta 9 THC. Like that is an unreal amount of THC, guys. Like, you could never reach that amount by smoking. It's not possible. So you'd have to consume it by eating it somehow. And that is a massive quantity of, that's a massive volume of substance you would have to consume. 2 pounds of pure THC is almost 1,000 milliliters, okay? Like, you're telling me a child somehow managed to eat damn near 1,000 milliliters of almost 100% pure delta 9 THC. I don't believe you, sir. Show me the evidence. Show me the studies. You cannot poison someone with weed. It's not possible. Well, it is possible. It's highly improbable and almost impossible to even get someone to consume that quantity of something that tastes like burnt plastic, because if you're going to eat the distillate, which would be the easiest way to consume it, it's going to taste disgusting.
Massive increases in adolescent usage.
Yeah, no shit. When you legalize anything, kids use it more. I mean, like, how is this even an argument that he's using? I don't even understand, because the same, like I said, you could flip the script. The same could be said about alcohol, tobacco, literally any other drug. And that's a real issue I have with a lot of this, is people seem to forget that alcohol and tobacco and caffeine are drugs, just like weed. The only difference between a medicine and a drug is the way that it is used, because they're exactly the same on a chemical and biological level.
And of course, when you combine that with the fact that the potency of cannabis today is dangerous, it drives mental health challenges and mental health sickness to the point of psychosis.
That is just fear mongering right there. There is absolutely zero evidence at all that weed causes psychosis. That is false. It is untrue. It is a lie that people perpetuate to scare people away from it. You're going to hear in this video a lot of Walsh and referencing that weed causes psychosis. It does not cause psychosis, okay? Yes, if you have psychosis, weed can make your psychosis worse. There's absolutely lots of science that proves that, and it's very well established, and like pretty much everyone's very, very well aware of that. But there's absolutely zero evidence that can even come close to demonstrating that weed causes psychosis. There is no link there at all. It's just people happen to notice that they're psychotic, usually when they smoke weed, because a lot of people don't know that they're psychotic until they have a psychotic episode, and then, they take a little too much one day, and then they have a psychotic episode, and then they realize, oh shit, I might be psychotic. See how that's not the weed causing the psychosis? It's just accentuating the problem you already have. Ben Shapiro would like to say, correlation is not necessarily causation. Those two are not always linked.
There's also been a systematic increase in these states in violent crime.
Yes, there absolutely has been a systematic increase in violent crime in the states that legalized cannabis. But if you'll also notice, the states that legalized cannabis almost always vote Democrat. What's happened recently, not even recently, but what's been happening in the Democrat-run states over the past 10 years? A radical increase in violent crime. Like I was saying earlier, correlation is not necessarily causation. You cannot blame the increase in violent crime on the fact that they legalized cannabis. That is not a logically sound argument, especially because we've seen this increase in violent crime in places where they haven't legalized cannabis and in places where they have. So that kind of proves the fact that cannabis is not the cause of this problem.
Of course, the black market doesn't go away. I mean, in California, the legal retail market only accounts for 10% of the entire cannabis market, and therefore gang activity escalates and violent crime increases. And that's on top of the fact that you see traffic accidents and fatalities increase over 70% in marijuana-related accidents.
Yeah, obviously the black market doesn't go away because there are still so many people who are unaware of the fact that weed has been legal in the United States since 2018. That people are still trying to buy the legal cannabis from the states where it's legal and get it to the states where it is not legal. So that's how you have this massive demand for this illegal black market. And yes, he is absolutely right, because I have seen this black market firsthand for myself. I know it's real, and I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah, like a majority of the cannabis grown in the legal states is being exported to the states where it's not legal. Of course, this is what's happening. And it's like, people don't realize that, like, the only reason there is such a demand for said illegal black market is because it's still, like, taboo in all these other states. If it was legal in all 50 states, the black market would disappear overnight. There would be no black market, because who would go to a sketchy drug dealer to buy something that may or may not, contain fentanyl, when they could just go down to their local smoke shop and go pick up a few grams of whatever flavor they were feeling like smoking that night? Nobody goes to drug dealers when it's legal to buy from a store. No one would do that. So this entire argument of, well, we can't legalize it because it just makes this massive black market. Well, yeah, because there's still too many people who are on the bandwagon of it needs to be illegal, hence creating said black market demand. It's like some people just don't understand basic economics of supply and demand. It's really quite simple, guys. And again, on his last comment about how traffic fatalities and accidents that are cannabis related increased by 70% after you legalize it. Well, no shit, Sherlock. What happened when we legalized alcohol? Huh? Oh, that's right. Way, way, way worse things happened when we legalized alcohol, but nobody wants to talk about that. They only want to bring this up when they want to beat their drum about cannabis should be illegal. I think I've proved well enough that the governor here absolutely has zero idea what he is talking about here. He is literally speaking out of his ass. So I'm going to let him finish his point and then let Matt Walsh start on his point.
And then finally, you couple this with the reality that the overall costs through the system in order to address the social requirements of this retail market far outweigh the tax receipts. And in fact, a study in Colorado found
so the governor is exactly correct, even if he is standing in front of a oddly fake-looking green screen. I don't know what the thought process was there. But he's absolutely right. That about sums it up. Marijuana is bad for Virginia. It's bad for any state. It's bad for every state that's legalized or decriminalized it. And you know, this is the point with marijuana. It is harmful. And the pothead activists who've gone around shouting for years that pot doesn't have any negative health effects were lying. You know, they were lying the whole time, or they were just high and they didn't realize that what they were saying wasn't true. Maybe it's some combination of the two, but it's a lie. You know, of course, it has negative effects. There's tons of research out there now, and the research in particular about its link with psychosis is especially interesting and especially terrifying. And that's the kind of thing that potheads used to scoff at. I mean, they still do, but it's, you know, nobody takes it seriously anymore. But you used to be laughed off the stage if you were to say anything about the link between people smoking marijuana and like actually losing their minds.
Oh my God, Matt, if you are basing your perceptions of why we should legalize marijuana based off of the idiots and the fools who were saying there's no possible negative health effects. There's negative health effects to literally everything. You're an idiot if you believed those idiots. I'm sorry, but like, come on, man. Like, how stupid do you have to be to believe people that are literally that stupid? And again, you can see Matt starting to draw the connection between psychosis and weed. And while, like, yes, there is a link between the two in the sense of, like, weed can make your psychosis worse, he seems to be of the perspective that weed causes psychosis, which it does not. Like, there is no evidence to back any of that up. Not only that, if we look at the percentage of the population that has psychosis, it's anywhere between 15 and 100 people out of 100,000. So out of 100,000, 1% would be 1,000. But the maximum that people seem to say that there could be out there is 100 out of 100,000, which means that the number of people with psychosis is less than 0.01%. You notice how they're singling out this 0.01% of the population and trying to act like, well, we can't give this to the rest of you because of this 0.01% of people react really negatively to it. And how about the 0.01% of people who don't want to do it? They don't have to do it. But it's the way I see this is the same as the gender ideology stuff. How the conservatives are always complaining about how gender ideology bends over backwards for the 0.01% of the population that is trans. Well, here we go. The conservatives are now bending over backwards to protect the 0.01% of the population that is psychotic. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel like I would notice if I became psychotic.
But now it's just a fact. Like the link between weed and schizophrenia is especially well established. So we know about that. We know about the bad health effects. We know about the dangers of people being under the influence. You know, we know about all those things. But mostly we now know from experience what happens in society, in a community, when weed becomes legal, acceptable, and accessible everywhere. And what happens, first of all, is that a whole lot more people start smoking it. All right, so there's always been this claim that, well, even if you make it illegal, everyone who wants to smoke it's going to smoke it anyway. Which, by the way, if that was true, then why do you care so much about making it legal? Like, if the law has no effect on people's behavior, if you cannot stop people at all from smoking weed by making it illegal, then why were you so desperate to make it legal? Apparently, it doesn't matter anyway. But no, it turns out that, of course, when you make something legal and therefore at the same time more accessible, and you take away the penalties, of course more people are going to do it. I mean, you're always going to have a certain portion of people who will do something anyway, regardless of the consequences, who are especially motivated to go out and and even if it's less accessible, they'll find a way to access it. That's always been the case. But the more accessible you make it, the more people do it, and the The more you take away legal consequences, the more people do it, obviously. And so that's what's happened. And we know that as people do it more often and they do it more openly, this precipitates a rise in crime rates, a decline in the quality of life for everybody in the community. And we've all seen this. We don't have to speculate anymore. We don't have to talk about what we think will happen. We've seen it happen. This is why I always go back to the question, has the legalization of weed in any city made that city better?
Has the legalization of alcohol in any city made that city better in any measurable way? Has the legalization of tobacco in any city made that city better in any measurable way? No, it hasn't. So saying that this is a reason weed should be illegal is also a reason alcohol and tobacco should be illegal. But I don't believe that that's a valid reason that any of those three substances should be illegal. But you'll start to notice this disconnect of thinking. I like to call it hypocrisy because people won't apply their own rules of logic to some of their own arguments. And it's absolutely baffling to me because it's just like, how do you not see your own hypocrisy?
And I know you might ask, well, what do you mean by better? That's kind of a subjective, more livable, like a better place to live for anybody. Has it solved any problem? Has it helped anything? Like, give me a thing that has been helped. Show me a city where they've legalized weed and something about that city, something tangible, improved. Show me that. You can't, because it has not made anywhere a better place to live. There's no example of that. And because it always works the other way. It works the opposite way. And we all know it. Like, having everybody walk around stoned all the time has made everything worse. It has improved nothing. Absolutely nothing. It has created problems and solved none, so it's bad. It's a bad idea. If you're going to do something that is guaranteed to make nothing better while making a lot of things worse, then you shouldn't do it. It's really that simple. What else is there to even say about it?
No, sir. That is not a valid argument against the legalization of weed. And if you do believe it to be a valid argument against the legalization of weed, then it is also a valid argument against the legalization of alcohol and tobacco. You're right, Walsh. What is it? It's that simple. What is there to even say about it? We should make tobacco and alcohol and all other legal drugs illegal because it's just that simple. We could vastly improve society by doing so. Think we could practically eliminate drunk driving accidents overnight, just like that. We could probably drastically decrease the amount of lung cancer in this country by 80 to 90% overnight. Think about it. Think of all the good we could achieve by making these things illegal. But nobody is talking about that. They only want to bring those things up when they want to talk about why weed should be illegal. They never want to talk about that for alcohol and tobacco. Because if they do, it shows their hypocrisy. They don't like that.
And this, by the way, is why I changed my mind on it personally. I was debating this yesterday on Twitter, as you know, where all the very fruitful debates happen. And somebody pulled one of my favorite moves where they go and they dig through. They say, let me see, this is what you're saying on this topic now, but let me see if you've always said this exact thing. And someone went and they scandalously discovered that back in 2018, I sent a tweet out where I was advocating for legalizing marijuana. And the thing is, you didn't have to go search through my tweet. You could just ask me, and I'll tell you that, yeah, that used to be my position. I've said that on the show. I used to be in favor of legalizing marijuana. I did. I was. I was wrong. So I changed my mind. You're allowed to do that. You don't, just because you don't have to, if you say something now, you don't have to say exactly that same thing forever until you die. Not only are you allowed to process new information and change your opinion, but you should. You should be open to new information, and your opinion should be open to change depending on that new information. And so that's what happened with legalizing marijuana. I was I was never like militant about it. And it's not something that I personally want to engage in. But I was generally persuaded by, the arguments people made in favor of it. And what changed my mind? Well, it was really no argument that anybody made on the other side. It's that I saw in practice what happens. So I heard all the arguments from the weed advocates saying, we can legalize it and here's going to be the result. Foolishly, I believed that argument. And then we did legalize it. And then I look and say, oh, well, none of that happened. In fact, everything that the prohibitionists said would happen did happen. And none of the positive results that the advocates promised panned out. And so, of course, I changed my position. Everybody should. Like, it's not even a valid position anymore to be in favor of weed legalization because we've all seen it in front of our faces what happens.
Mr. Walsh, as I pointed out earlier, if you actually believed the weed advocates, like the idiots that were saying, oh, there's no negative health effects, oh, look at all the positives from this, you are an idiot. Get that through your thick skull. Only an idiot would have believed those people. Anyone with any common sense that had any understanding of what was actually being talked about would have immediately realized that those people were either too stupid to know what they were talking about or they were liars. And that is why I say, if you actually believed those people and the lies that they pushed, then you are just as dumb as they are. Also, one could say that after seeing the number of people who die every year from drunk driving accidents and the number of people who overdose on alcohol and all the other negatives that alcohol has, one could very easily say the same thing you said about weed, about alcohol. There is no valid position to be in favor of alcohol legalization anymore. It kills too many people, causes too much crime, blah, 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 blah. Every reason you listed for why weed should be illegal is also a reason why alcohol should be illegal. And the fact that you refuse to acknowledge that these reasons that you are mentioning, Mr. Walsh, are valid for literally every single drug that exists, pretty much, then nobody should listen to you and what you have to say about it because you cannot apply your own logic to your own arguments.
And there's really nothing else to say about it, which is why you'll then get a bunch of cliched slogans shouted at you by the potheads. And just using this as an example, mentioning the debate I was having yesterday. And if someone tweeted this at me, and I'm just using this example because it's like running down all of the most cliched arguments. Somebody said, bad call. Alcohol and cigarettes are far worse. God created it, being weed. It hasn't killed anybody. Veterans need it for PTSD, etc. A Democrat made it illegal decades ago. Joe Biden is against it and thinks it's a gateway drug. Prohibition is unconstitutional. Okay. Now, I'm using this as an example because this is the classic rundown of pro-weed arguments that you hear all the time. And it's pretty much always like every tweet that anyone puts out or a post or anything in favor of weed legalization, it's always that. It's like some variation. They might mix it around a little bit, but it's always just that. And what are the problems with these arguments? Well, first of all, there are many substances that exist in the natural world that you're not supposed to put in your body, okay? So this God created it stuff, it's the dumbest, even back when I found the pro-weed argument, legalization argument persuasive, I was never persuaded by that because it's so stupid. Like God created it, so therefore it's automatically a good idea to light it on fire and inhale it? There are a whole lot of things God has created that you should not light on fire and inhale. There are a lot of things God has created that you should not consume in any form. Okay? If you're lost in the woods one day and you're starving, okay, it would not be a good idea to just stumble without any prior knowledge, to stumble across some kind of a bush with berries and say, well, God created these berries, so they must be okay. God created it. That's an assumption that if you make that assumption enough times, you will definitely die because God has created a lot of poison berries. He's created a lot of poisonous things in the world that you're not supposed to consume. So the God created line it's true. Like God did create, he created the plant, right? That is used to create this drug, but that doesn't mean that it's okay to consume.
If you'll notice at the end, you can really begin to understand how Walsh sees this plant/drug. He views the plant as something that us humans use to create the drug when that's actually not at all what happened. The plant creates the drug and we the humans grow the plant to harvest it so that we can use the drug. While yes, you could argue that humans have used selective breeding over thousands of years to, help push this plant in this direction where it has gone. But that argument could be said about literally every plant that humans grow. So, I don't really consider that a very logical argument. And I find the poisonous argument very interesting because anyone who drinks alcohol or anyone who knows anything about the biochemistry of alcohol and what happens in your body when you ingest alcohol, anyone who's honest knows it's a poison. Like it's literally a poison. So I find it ironic that Mr. Walsh believes it is perfectly okay to ingest a poison that could not exist in the natural world unless humans went through a specific process of creating it, but the other substance which grows naturally on a plant that was created by nature and probably cultivated by humans over thousands of years, that's not okay to ingest for some reason, even though it's actually not poisonous at all, and to actually consume enough of it to have an overdose, at least what we think would be. Nobody's ever actually overdosed on THC, so we don't actually know if you can overdose on it. Like, that's the honest truth about it. It's like the overdose limit is just what people assume would kill a person, because nobody's ever actually died, because nobody's ever actually eaten that much of it, because you can't. It's too much.
As for alcohol and cigarettes, even if alcohol and cigarettes are worse, that still doesn't mean that weed should be legal, because all you've done by that logic is add to the problem.
Actually, it kind of does, because every single argument that you've made currently, as of to this point in this video, has basically stated that, well, here's all these bad things that weed does to people, and that's why it should be illegal. And then now you just said, well, even if alcohol and tobacco is worse, that's no reason weed should be legal. Do you see the circular logic there of how that does not make any sense at all? It's like saying, don't eat that, it'll kill you, but it doesn't actually kill you. But then you go and eat this other thing that's actually way worse for you, and then they're like, but that's fine to eat that one. That one's okay. You're good to eat that. But it's like, but the one that you said would kill me didn't, and the one that you said was fine actually will kill me if I eat too much of it.
And saying that it hasn't killed anyone is just false. It ignores, for one thing, the deaths caused by people under the influence. It again ignores all the volumes of research about all the negative health side effects and everything else.
Now, you got to be careful with what you say here, because what he said was technically true. And that while, yes, it can kill people under the influence. And, as mentioned earlier, if you have psychosis and you smoke weed, you could have a psychotic episode. But here's the facts. There is not a single person that exists on Earth, or that has ever existed in recorded history, where on the death certificate it says overdosed on Delta-9 THC or on any other cannabinoid that the plant makes. No such death certificate exists. No such person ever lived whose life was ended because of their consumption of THC. Well, yes, it is perfectly valid to say, yeah, somebody smoked too much, was way too high, got in the car, drove, and then killed themselves because they drove off the road. Like, yeah, that absolutely could kill you. But let's put this into perspective. How many people are involved in alcohol-related driving problems versus how many people are involved in marijuana-related driving problems? Because I'd be willing to bet that the number of people who drink and drive is vastly outnumbers the number of people who smoke and drive. Not only that, I'm not saying it's okay to smoke and drive. I'm not advocating for intoxicated driving at all. But what I will say is that it's a lot harder for someone to become so intoxicated on marijuana that they are incapable of operating a motor vehicle. While yes, they can become a lot more dangerous at operating said motor vehicle, I've never seen someone so stoned that they couldn't drive. Like, it's just not real. And I've seen people consume what I would consider unreal amounts of weed. The same cannot be said for alcohol. You can absolutely consume enough alcohol that you are incapable of operating a motor vehicle. And that's why I'm not even going to get into the nuanced differences of which type of intoxication would make it easier versus more difficult to operate a motor vehicle, because I don't even need to get into that level of detail, because just by the simple fact that you can pass out while drunk, but you can't pass out while stoned, should be proof enough that these things are not anywhere near on the same level of how dangerous they are. At least if we're talking in the sense of public safety. Like, just think, how many times have you heard in the newspaper that somebody in your local community died because of a drunk driver? Okay, versus how many times have you heard in your local community that somebody was killed or died because of a stoned driver or somebody who was smoking way too much weed? I've never even heard of that. I've never even seen somebody in the newspaper arrested for a DUI because they were way too high to operate a vehicle. I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure it exists. But we got to remember, people, weed has been legal in America since 2018. So everyone in the know has been smoking legal weed since then. So if there was going to be a massive increase in violent crime, in car accidents, and all these things that these people are saying that are going to happen if we legalize weed, well, the fact that it hasn't really happened in the past 6 years, well, yes, it's happening in some states, but it's not happening in other states. And we can't chalk that up to, well, it's the weed that's doing it because, well, the 2018 Farm Bill legalized weed in all 50 states. So what now? And lastly, because he touched on the negative health effects, I mean, let's be honest here. I've never known someone to smoke too much weed, get so depressed that they ended up unaliving themselves. I have known people who were in a very bad place in their life and they had a drinking problem, and one night they drank a little too much and they are not here anymore. Well, yes, there are certain medical conditions that can be made worse by weed. As I discussed earlier, those medical conditions are exceedingly rare, first of all, and second of all, if you have said medical conditions, don't partake. The science is very well established that if you partake, you are very likely to cause yourself to have a very bad time. Don't do it. The problem is a lot of people don't seem to understand that weed doesn't cause psychosis. It just helps you notice that you have psychosis. But everyone wants to act like, oh, the science is out. You get all these negative health effects from smoking weed. No, you already had those negative health effects. The weed just made it worse. Just like any other drug would. If you started drinking too much alcohol with negative health effects, the alcohol would affect your mental health negatively. This is true for every drug. This is how drugs work in the human body. This is just basic biochemistry.
And there's one other point that I want to make that came up last night. And on this thing about alcohol and tobacco products, again, even if I agree that alcohol and tobacco products are just as bad or worse, that's not an argument for legalizing yet another bad thing.
Well, you can say that, Mr. Walsh, but it just kind of shows your hypocrisy out in the open where everyone can see, because we all see that you are not advocating for the illegality of alcohol and tobacco for the very reasons that you just listed that weed should be illegal. So the fact that you are literally out here campaigning for the illegality of weed for X, Y, and Z reasons, but those are also reasons for alcohol that you said you might agree on, and I really think you should, because every single reason that you listed that weed should be illegal is also a reason that alcohol and tobacco should be illegal. And the fact that you cannot wrap your head around that concept shows your hypocrisy. You have not thought this position through to its logical conclusion, apparently. And we need to be honest here in the level of bad of the substances that we are talking about, okay? Because he's trying to make this blanket statement like alcohol, tobacco, and weed are almost equivalent in the levels of bad for each other, when that is absolutely not true at all. And while yes, he does say that alcohol could be worse, I mean, let's be honest here. It is worse. We know for a fact it is. There's plenty of studies, there's plenty of science. There are plenty of recovered alcoholics that will tell you so. I am one of them. Alcohol almost killed me multiple times throughout my life. I was addicted to alcohol for almost 10 years, okay? So it really bothers me when people just gloss over the negative effects that alcohol can have on people, especially when they're glossing over those negative health effects to beat their drum for weed should be illegal when they don't have any legitimate or logical reasons why it should be. They just have hypocritical reasons that if said reasons were applied to any other drug that is legal, that they liked, they would quickly realize that their reason is really stupid.
It's sort of like, if I was morbidly obese, but I didn't drink alcohol, and then you said, well, you're already obese, you might as well be a binge drinker too. Well, that logic doesn't make any sense. That only makes sense in a kind of defeatist, suicidal sense. That's quite literally a suicidal argument when you're saying, well, these other bad things are happening, so let's just add another bad thing. Let's give up, basically.
Again, by that logic, Mr. Walsh, then you're right. We shouldn't just give up. We should not give up on prohibition. We should prohibit every single substance we can possibly prohibit because it is for the good of society, as you were clearly stating in this clip. Oh, you don't like that. You think alcohol and tobacco should be legal, but weed shouldn't be. But yet every single reason that you state that weed should be illegal is also a reason alcohol and tobacco should not be illegal as well. So you have yet to bring up a reason that weed should be illegal and alcohol and tobacco should not be illegal. Also, his analogy doesn't really make that much sense because, I guess on a national scale, it kind of makes sense in a way, but not really, because legalizing it isn't telling people, hey, you should go and do this. You're just removing the criminal punishments for the people that do it. Like, and also, I'd like to point out that by that very same logic of the analogy of the fat person and telling them they should go do this other bad thing as well as being fat, I mean, the same could be said for alcohol. If you're going to use that argument for weed, then I could use that argument for alcohol. Like, America's already obese enough as it is. We don't need to be adding the calories of all the alcohol that people are drinking on top of all the calories of all the fatty foods that they're drinking. So, I've been saying this whole freaking time. Every argument you make, Mr. Walsh, can be applied to alcohol and tobacco, and absolutely should be, because if you do not apply this logic evenly across all substances, then you are being a hypocrite. He's also assuming the worst in people, that as soon as you like allow someone to do something, they're just going to absolutely go to the worst possible scenario of it. Like in the analogy he was stating of the fat person, if you tell them to start drinking, that they'll just immediately become a binge drinker. Like, some people have moderation, man. I get it. Some people don't have moderation, but like, you shouldn't be taking things away from people who do have moderation because some people don't have moderation. That's not what America is about. America is about freedom, okay? And here in America, we don't take things away from people because some people don't know how to deal with them. We don't make guns illegal because a very select few people go and shoot up schools. See, we would not apply this logic, Mr. Walsh, to any other topic because it does not make logical sense.
That doesn't make sense. But also, alcohol and tobacco are part of American culture. Okay, going back to the beginning of this country, that's one of the reasons why any effort to totally ban them has not been successful. Because it's an ingrained part of American culture.
Man, every time somebody brings this point up, it just grinds my gears, because it just shows you how historically illiterate some people are, and how ignorant they are of history. It's just laughable when you really begin to understand how little these people actually understand about the topic they are speaking on. Like, when you really begin to break it down to its core concepts of what they're saying, you realize that everything that they're saying is just flat out wrong, or a lie, or just a misconception. Now, obviously, I agree. Alcohol and tobacco is part of American culture and has been part of American culture since the founding of this country. But if we are to say that about alcohol and tobacco, we must say it about hemp, because I don't remember the exact percentage. I looked it up one day and calculated it, but it's somewhere between 60 and 80% of our founding fathers grew hemp. That's right. 60 to 80% of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence grew hemp on their farms, where they also brewed whiskey and probably grew tobacco as well. So if you're going to go with the argument of, well, alcohol and tobacco is just part of American culture, it's been there since the beginning, well, so has hemp, my guy. And just to remind everyone, hemp is what the government legally classified as legal weed in 2018 in the 2018 Farm Bill. It's called hemp. That's the legal weed in all 50 states. And our founding fathers grew it. And in fact, a lot of botanists have traced the origin of hemp seeds in America back to 1611 and the founding of the Jamestown colony. So, if you want to really get specific about it, hemp has been in America since the first colony was established in America. So this whole argument about how, well, weed just isn't part of American culture, bullshit. That's total, complete bullshit. Do not believe the liars that tell you that crap. They need to read a history book, because clearly they are very ignorant of some American history, and they should be embarrassed that they are that ignorant of our own country's history when they are using our own country's history as a soapbox to preach about prohibition. Because at the end of the day, that's what this whole argument is about. It's about prohibition of substances that people use to get intoxicated. That's all that this argument is about. And the fact that we're drawing these imaginary lines between substances of like, oh, well, these substances, it's okay for us to prohibit. But these other substances, no, that's fine. As long as you're of a certain age, use as much as you want, even if it kills you, doesn't matter. It just makes my brain hurt how some people cannot see this hypocrisy.
Tobacco in particular has helped to build this country from the very beginning. And so did alcohol. Now, I'm not saying that this is a definitive reason to not ban them, but it is a reason.
Well, there you go, Mr. Walsh. You right there just stated a reason why we should not ban weed. And you said it in your own words. That's a reason we shouldn't ban alcohol and tobacco. And, well, those exact same reasons apply to weed, aka hemp. So, just because you want to use a different word to describe the same plant does not mean that you can get away with saying that weed was not part of American culture since the literal founding of America. Get the fuck out of here. Go read a fucking history book, you ignorant fool.
To not ban them. And it's a pretty good one, actually. Tradition matters. History matters. Those are part of our culture. Marijuana historically is not.
Yes, Mr. Walsh, tradition matters. History matters. You should go read some because clearly you do not understand what you're talking about at all.
Now, somebody brought up that Native Americans smoked, and so it is part of American heritage. And I think it's true that Indian tribes had marijuana. Now, I could be wrong. I haven't done a lot of research on this because I don't care that much. But I think that it was introduced. I don't think that they had it, prior to contact with the New World.
Oh my God, the first fact Mr. Walsh has stated that's a fact and that is not a hypocritical fact. Oh my God. We've finally gotten to the first part of this video that I'm not going to debate because it's actually true. But I'd also like to point out that he right there just admitted that he doesn't know a lot about it because he's never done a lot of research about it because he doesn't care that much about it. And I think that point, we all already know that, Mr. Walsh. You've made that point very obvious that you do not care about this, you do not know anything about this, and you need to go read some history about it. Although at least he finally got the fact right of, the Native Americans didn't really have, like the hemp as we know it in the modern day until pretty much the Europeans brought it over. While there were basically different subspecies of essentially the same plant, it wasn't really on the same level as the hemp that the Europeans brought over.
As far as I'm aware, marijuana was introduced to the native tribes in the 15th to 16th centuries. But even if it wasn't marijuana, the native tribes, they smoked peyote, they had other kinds of drugs with hallucinogenic properties. The shamans, the witch doctors, they were always tripping on something, right? So it is probably true that even if it wasn't exactly marijuana, it's probably true that the drug habits of Native American tribes are closer to the drug habits of Americans today. There's a similarity. But think about that for a second. Because Native tribes were 5,000 years behind the civilized world. These people were stuck in the Stone Age, literally in the Stone Age, many of them. They didn't have the wheel, they didn't have written language. Many of them were not all of them, but many of them were nomadic tribes, hunter-gatherers. They were extremely primitive, even by 16th century standards. So the fact that they were also high all the time, perhaps should tell us something.
Mr. Walsh's cognitive dissonance is on full display in this clip because, as you can see in the previous clip, he just mentioned that he didn't believe that the Native Americans had access to weed until the Europeans brought it over, and that is, I would say mostly true enough that I would basically agree with it. And then he says, he tries to blame the fact that said societies of Native Americans were so technologically unadvanced compared to the Europeans on the fact that they were using hemp, because that doesn't make any sense, because you can't say the Europeans brought it over, but it's also the cause of the reason that the Native Americans were so behind the Europeans before the Europeans even arrived. That makes my brain hurt. I can't even round the corners on that square. How do you make it logic? No logic.
Here's the fact. We know that a society where people smoke tobacco constantly and drink whiskey from morning to night can also be a highly functional, highly successful society. We know that. And we know that because that was our society. Okay, that was our society in the 20th century when we accomplished all of the things that we accomplished. We were landing on the moon and winning world wars and doing everything else. And going from horse and buggy to the moon landing and beyond. Well, not beyond, unfortunately, but at least to the moon landing. So we know that. The greatest civilizations on Earth, in the history of the Earth, have at least had booze, and lots of it. The greatest civilization in the history of the world had booze, and people were drunk constantly. Our own civilization, when it was great, again, had tobacco and booze, and lots of both. Now, I'm not saying that tobacco and booze made us great exactly, but it did not prevent our greatness. Like, there is no evidence on a societal scale that having easy access to legal tobacco and booze will precipitate a societal collapse. There's no evidence of that.
I'd like you to remember that quote that he said. We know in a society that smokes tobacco constantly and that drinks whiskey from morning to night can also be a highly functional, highly successful society. We know that, and we know that because that was our society. Keep this quote in mind for the next clip.
Because we've seen a society that is like drowning in both of those things, and also caffeine, like nicotine, caffeine, and booze. That's America has run on those things even more than it's run on Dunkin's, but also the booze and the tobacco. So we've seen that. But so we know that. What about a society full of stoners and druggies? Can that kind of society thrive? There's no evidence of that. There has never been a society of people who are drugged out of their mind, stoned. There's never been a society like that has thrived.
And I quote, "There has never been a society that has been drugged out of their minds or stoned. There's never been a society like that has thrived." So I think what Mr. Walsh is trying to say here is that no society that can be drugged out of their mind can be successful. Yet if you rewind it to the previous clip before this last clip, the quote that I remember I told you to remember, that he said a highly functional society was practically drowning in booze, tobacco, and caffeine. So, well, which is it, Mr. Walsh? Is a highly functioning society drowning in intoxicating drugs from morning until night, as you said? Or is a highly functioning society not doing that, as you seem to allude to for your prohibition of marijuana? Like, I do not understand how this man can be so smart sometimes, yet say such contradictory things so close to each other and not realize that what he just said contradicts the previous thing that he said. Like, it's pretty bad when somebody can use your own words to disprove your own argument. That's how you know you have a bad argument, because your own argument disproves your argument, which just makes it laughable that he didn't catch this, that anyone saying these things didn't catch this, because it's like, well, obviously you've never thought through your own argument to its logical conclusion if your own argument can defeat itself. Because if you had thought through it to its logical conclusion, you would have realized that and been like, maybe I need to change a few things about my argument so it isn't self-defeating.
There are plenty of societies that have engaged, in large part in those sorts of activities. And they live in mud huts, okay? It's like they struggle to invent, they don't invent the wheel, okay? Like that's what that kind of society looks like. And if we want to end up back there, if we want to just decline all the way and take this thing full circle, then that's what's going to happen.
Again, with the ridiculous analogy of the technological differences between the Europeans and the Native Americans being compared to the supposed drug habits of each culture, when he previously stated that the Native Americans didn't have access to the supposed drug he was blaming for this lack of technological advancement in the Native American culture until the Europeans arrived and brought it there. Wow, the mental gymnastics required to make that make sense is astronomical. And what I think we need to remember here is what this argument is truly about, because I think in all of the self-contradiction and all of the huff and puff about the dangers and the scary and the scare tactics and all that we need to remember like what we're actually talking about here, okay? Like, we're talking about prohibition. That's the real issue that we're talking about. Because what we're actually discussing, whether people want to admit it or not, is whether we should prohibit weed or not. And I think we need to look to American history for our inspiration because, well, American history, as Mr. Walsh proved, was drowning in booze, tobacco, and caffeine for most of our history, and we were one of the greatest countries in the world. I don't think legalizing weed is going to slow that roll. I'm pretty sure all of the other problems are what's slowing the roll. And the fact that conservatives are so pro the prohibition of marijuana that I think it's driving a lot of the younger people away from the conservative party simply because I've noticed the drinking culture is just not the same as it was when I was younger. Like kids these days don't drink as much as they used to. There's a lot more people that would rather smoke a few doobies after work than have a few beers. And I think a lot of that has to do with the reason that you don't get a hangover from a few doobies. Like, yeah, has the possibility to make less than 0.01% of the population have a psychotic episode, but if you have psychosis, don't smoke it. It's really that easy. And the simple fact that if we are to say that marijuana is to be prohibited in this country or illegal, well, we also need to recognize that any reason that we can come up for as to why we should prohibit marijuana and not prohibit alcohol or tobacco is contradictory. You cannot come up with a reason as to why weed should be illegal, but alcohol should be legal, and have it make sense for both drugs when the logic is applied to both drugs. Because remember, as I said earlier, the only difference between a drug and a medicine is what you call it. It's the same substance. And I think we need to go a level deeper here because we're still not all the way down the rabbit hole yet. Prohibition has never worked in this country. It never has, it never will, because prohibition runs contradictory to the ideals of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and just the general idea of freedom in this country. And because if you were to boil America down into one sentence, like the ideas that America stands for, it is, I can do whatever I want so long as it doesn't affect anyone else. And that's what makes America great, is that you have the freedom to pretty much do anything you want so long as no one else is affected by it. Or at least if there are other people affected by it, they are consenting to being affected by what you're doing, which, in my personal belief, is the way the entire world should be. Because as the Declaration of Independence says, these are God-given rights, not rights given by the government. They are given to humans by God, so only God can take them away. And while, yes, I'm very well aware that the Founding Fathers never wrote anything into the legal documentation about drugs, essentially, as Mr. Walsh points out, it was very heavily implied. All the Founding Fathers were heavy drinkers. Almost all of them grew hemp. Almost all of them grew tobacco. It's just laughable, in my opinion, to believe that we can prohibit one of these substances without prohibiting all of them, because the real question we need to ask ourselves as Americans on this issue, that all people in this country need to ask themselves, is, do you support prohibition or not? And if you support prohibition, then do you actually support prohibition and not just, hypocritically support prohibition, as in you support prohibition but only for one specific drug, but you don't want to prohibit any of the drugs that you use to relax at the end of the day or to have fun on a weekend. No. You don't want to prohibit those drugs. You only want to prohibit the drugs that other people use, because that doesn't affect you. This is why I am against the prohibition of any drug. Now, I'm not saying all drugs should be legal to the point where you can walk down to a gas station and buy cocaine or pure heroin. No, it's not at all what I'm saying. I just think that all substances should be made legal so long as you have either a medical or a religious reason to be taking them. And then obviously we can have a carve out of substances that are used for, recreation, i.e. tobacco, alcohol, and weed. Because we as Americans need to realize that a lot of the reasons that a lot of the drugs are so illegal in this country is because of the medical industry. The medical industry is lobbying to keep all of these drugs as illegal as humanly possible, and they are the source of all of the fear-mongering behind all of this, because why would they want you to be able to grow a plant in your backyard that could solve some of your medical needs, when if they made that illegal for you to do, you would then have to buy a prescription from them, and every so often you'd have to buy another one and another one and another one, and anyone who knows anything about weed probably already knows that I didn't even touch on any single one of the medical uses for marijuana, when anyone who's used it either recreationally or for a medical purpose understands that there are many, many medical uses for such a drug. And the fact that it's as illegal as it is and as hard to get as it is absolutely absurd and is a blatant attack on the personal freedoms of every single American. But the reason I didn't want to even get into any of the medical benefits of marijuana is because Mr. Walsh didn't mention any of the medical benefits of marijuana, and I find it ironic that he refuses to acknowledge any of them, because even if you are pro the prohibition of marijuana, you should at least allow it for medical uses, because it actually has legitimate medical uses for lots of people. But yeah, since he didn't mention any of them, I wanted to completely disprove his arguments without having to mention any of them, just to prove that I don't need to use that argument. Man, did y'all hear that? That was a drive-by. I was just locked and loaded, ready to fucking go. Just in case. Thank God they drove off. But yeah, I completely lost my train of thought. I have no idea where I left off. So much for going to bed early tonight. Now my adrenaline's going. She, man, welcome to Houston. That's how it be. H-Town till I drown, ho. Really hope they didn't hit my fucking car. I'll be pissed if they did. But I feel like my car alarm would have gone off if it got shot. I hope. I hope my car alarm would go off if my car got shot. It should. I guess it depends where it got shot, too. I hope it didn't. So yeah, if you want to help keep me safe from drive-by shootings, leave a like on this video, subscribe to this channel, and don't forget to follow me on Rumble.